Thanks, Steve. Good morning, everyone. For the next hour or so, we're going to be doing a panel discussion on IPv6 entitled Time for Transition or Just More Gossip. For those who are unfamiliar, GOSIP was the I guess, the early 90s government initiative towards using OSI networking everywhere in the government, which was very successful. Anyway, so we have an interesting crowd with us today. We have 5 panelists. These are folks who come from a mixture of IPv6 boosters and IPv6 skeptics. They're from major carriers, and also we have a representative today from a major government contractor. And some of you guys are saying, well, you know, the federal government's been IPv6, why didn't we get a federal government guy? Well, the reason is because it's very hard to get any actual factual stuff out of government folks. Government contractor folks, on the other hand, are much more willing to actually talk and give us information. So the way this session is going to work, the way the format's going to be is, we're going to start with some introductions from all the folks up here. Then we're going to go into some questions that we have prepared. There's not going to be any real formal presentations, maybe one slide or so from each person. And then, you know, mixed in with some of the questions I've already got prepared, we're also going to open up some questions to the microphones around the room. And so folks can go up and rock the mic, as it were, and ask some of the hard questions. If you guys hear things up here you don't agree with, you know, definitely challenge it. You don't have to hold your questions till the end. We'll be cutting to questions hopefully fairly early in the presentation. So with no further ado, let me start out by introducing Joe Houle, if I'm pronouncing that properly, with AT&T. Joe, would you care to introduce yourself?
Again, I'm Joe Houle with AT&T. I'm responsible for some emerging services for AT&T across our Layer 2 and Layer 3 services, and for Internet and private networking, and IPv6 clearly falls into that category. And again, there's some great questions coming up, so I won't focus on those, but just some starting points. Again, there was a question: are we pro or con? And I would categorize myself as pragmatically pro. So you'll hear some of that coming through. But let me real quickly, why IPv6, why now? And I think I got 3 drivers here, 2 personal, 1 why I'll make believe I'm a government person for a moment. I do believe we are running out of IPv4 addresses. I don't think that's a myth. I do believe we're running out of those. In addition, I do believe NATs and non-unique addresses are making it hard for us as service providers to offer services over IP or everything over IP or whatever we end up wanting to call that. That converged IP network is going to be very difficult to build with these non-unique addresses that are surviving here in IPv4, and NATs are facilitating that environment. And then finally, why the government? I think the U.S. government would love to see IPv6 take off, because I think they're a little afraid of the haves and have-nots, and the U.S. is traditionally on the have side of the have and have-nots, and I think IPv6 may be one of those things that might enable the haves to do something that the have-not can't, and we're not used to being on the have-not side of that divide. So I think they're trying to do first some low-hurdle things to try to facilitate us to be on the have side of that divide. Thank you, Dan.
Great. Our next speaker is going to be Jared Much from NTT America, otherwise known as Vario.
Yeah, my name is Jared Much. Like you said, from NTT America, there was some stuff at the end of the year where we split we basically operate the global backbone for NTT Communications under the name NTT America. We presently are doing IPv6 native across our network, and we have been doing it for a while. And here to answer questions people have on this stuff, and generally pro IPv6, because it's there, it's cool, it works, and we derive some extra money from it.
Okay. Now that we know V6 is cool, our next speaker is going to be Wes George from Sprint.
Hi, I'm Wes George with Sprint's IP Engineering Group. I'm wearing my Rob Raquel hat. He couldn't be here because of the weather. So basically, I would say that we're basically pro V6, but we're still looking at it skeptically, partially because of what you're seeing here. This is the CATA skitter graph for IPv6. Shows we're pretty close to the center of the IPv6 world as far as routes are concerned. But then you can see a snapshot of one of our interfaces. There's pretty much just ping traffic going across still. And but the thing is that it's starting to become a little more of an issue because of the amount of visibility that's getting within the government. I actually participated in an IPv6 summit that the government had in Reston in December, where the general feel is that IPv6 is going to save the world, rainbows and puppy dogs for everyone. You know, everything works. We just turn it on and it happens. This is being sort of continued on because vendors, people like Microsoft, the networking vendors are all saying, yeah, we're ready whenever you are. Just install our software, turn it on, and it'll all work beautifully. When you start looking at the overall implementation of it, yeah, at least this time the government's willing to spend some money on it. Unlike,
But hold on, are you saying the vendor marketing people aren't being completely truthful?
yeah,
I'm sorry, go on.
that could be. It's once the implementation catches up with the marketing, there's some good things that can happen here in terms of what the government wants, what they're expecting. You know, a lot of it is that they don't know what they want yet, but they know they want it, and they know they want it soon, and they're kind of hoping that the carriers will figure it out and come back to them and say, this is what we can give you, and hopefully that'll be enough.
Okay. Our next speaker, thank you very much, Wes. Our next speaker will be Jason Schilling from UUNet, otherwise known as Verizon Business. Pardon me, Schiller.
So I just wanted to give kind of a quick overview of what we're doing in V6. In the U.S., we deployed our Phase 1 network in 2004. It's a separate AS with GRE overlay. Most of our customers are GRE customers. We're embarking into Phase 2 next month, which is going to be a 6PE design on AS701. So that'll be dual stack IPv4, IPv6 at the edge, but 6PE in the core. Day one, there's going to be a few access methods as well as support for mail and DNS. And our initial footprint is going to be limited to our 6PE capable devices and have some limited IT backend. Throughout the year, we expect to evolve the service, add additional 6PE devices on the edge, whether that's through equipment refresh with 6PE capable devices, or whether that's through upgrading existing devices because of demand for V6. We're also going to increase the IT support to be fully supported and have a comprehensive product offering. And then early next year, our plan is to do V6 native in the core. Basically, our philosophy when it comes to V6 is that it's important. People are probably going to be using it in the future, but right now the demand is not very high. It's not generating a lot of revenue. We don't want to spend a lot of money on it. We want to build a just-in-time network.
Then why put it in the core?
The reason why we didn't go straight into the core was certification issues.
But no, I guess my question is, if there's not a lot of demand, why and it's something new, why are you guys, in 2007 going to make it the core of your network?
Well, I think the idea here is that at some point there's going to be a wide-scale migration to IPv6. And in order to do that easily, in order to have an easy transition from V4 to V6, you want to have a V4 and a V6 topology which are consistent.
Great. And thank you, Jason. Finally, we have Fred Wetling. Fred is from Bechtel. It's pretty unusual here at NANOG to get representatives from large enterprises. Fred is also highly involved with the IPv6 Business Council. Fred?
Thanks, Dan. Bechtel is a large engineering and construction company, one of the world's biggest. And one of our business lines, Bechtel Telecoms, is the largest E&C company for carriers. So if you're Sprint or AT&T, we probably put part of your network together. So I have kind of an interesting perspective, not only from that standpoint. Government contractors or government clients are important to us. But beyond that, one thing you'll see on the slide up here is we're interested in the non-traditional transport of IP services. And what we see in industry outside of the office building is a large shift from traditional plant automation, building automation, process automation networks from proprietary protocols over to IP. So when we start taking a look at IP address allocation, security, end-to-end security, for things such as the remote control room for a nuclear power plant, things of this nature. There's some things that are very attractive to us in the area of V6. So Bechtel's internal deployment that started last year on an enterprise basis, and this is going to hit 40,000 people, is geared to build a competence within the company. And one thing that we've noticed is the lack of maturity in some products, but they're coming along relatively quickly. So the demand may not be there yet. And it's kind of a chicken and the egg. If we go back to 1995, when IE, Microsoft Internet Explorer version 1 came out, XML was immature, HTML was immature, and where are we now? Things evolved, and I think that's where we are with the networks. So I look at this from the standpoint of competition. Where can Bechtel compete more aggressively around the world? Where can we demonstrate leadership? And hopefully we'll hear some IPv6 leadership out of my colleagues up here today.
Okay. Thank you very much. Okay, and my name is Daniel Golding. I'll be your host today. So let's jump right into the questions now. We'll keep this as interesting as possible. Okay, so our first question, the way I'm going to do this is we'll just sort of throw some of these out there for folks. You can have people's names up there so you can remember who everyone is. So let me ask this question to the panel. Why IP, for you guys who are carriers, for enterprises, whatever, why IP6 and why now? I mean, you guys have kind of answered this, but I guess my question more specifically is, why are you implementing V6 other than just, well, it's sort of cool to do? Is it that it's address exhaustion? You know, you fear that you will soon run out of addresses? Is it new capabilities? Is it vendors pushing new hardware? Is it federal government RFP requirements, frankly? You know, just in all honesty, we have limited time as engineers to do stuff. Why are we doing it now?
So the reason why we went and we did our rollout in 2003 was we had essentially a combination of factors, including internal customer desire side within our own company to go and roll out the native IPv6 services and products across the global network. That way it's unified across all of the NTT business entities of some sort that we have. Combined with that, being that we're a subsidiary of the Japanese telephone company operating here, we faced challenges in that we have Japan as one of the leading IPv6 market adopters, and since we're the big player within that market space, we needed to do that for that specific reason, combined with government mandates and such there.
But how much of that is political, Jared? Because if you look at you know, Japan being one of the leading IPv6 adopters, if you go into the average Japanese person's home or go into a government office and you look at what IP stack is on the average workstation, for the most part it's going to be IPv4. I mean, there really isn't that much Japanese IPv6 adoption. Is it more playing nice with the Japanese government?
Well, it's because you need to cater to the specific business markets. If you look at why, for example, and I'm not intending to pick on them because I didn't warn them in advance, but why, for example, an AT&T or a Sprint might want to go and roll out their V6 services, perhaps that's because they have large government contracts where they're the preferred carriers of choice, and same could be the case for MCI or any other carrier. And as far as that goes, it also puts us in a position to be a global leader. You might be able to look at the skitter graph and figure out who's at least right now at the center of the V6 core. And I think we've really put down a flag and said that this is something that we would like to lead in as well. And it's not just that, but it's also sort of a technical cool thing of saying, look, it's here, it works. You know, this is not a problem. We've been doing this for a while. We've faced obviously some challenges. Obviously we work with our vendors to resolve the issues, but it's been working. We haven't had a major network meltdown because we're running dual stack v4, v6.
Okay. Anybody else?
Yeah. Again, this is Joe Hool again from AT&T. Again, to reiterate, yes, if customers are willing to pay for an IPv6 service, we should be in a position to offer IPv6 service. But I'd like to go back to the services over IP. We've shoehorned voice over IP into an IPv4, but again, it's been primarily on the public IPv4 network. And again, we've kind of gone around NATs again with the voice over IP. But as we try to position as an industry this this common IP infrastructure, this converged IP infrastructure, this everything over IP, we're going to trip over ourselves with these non-unique addresses trying to work on a public internet, in private VPNs, in private-to-private communications. We're going to trip over ourselves when we have these non-unique addresses which just propagate all throughout the IPv4 environment right now, and NATs are facilitating that. With IPv6, there's no need for non-unique addresses. Everything can have a unique address, and then that will help us get to some of these voice over services over IP situations that we're really looking forward to.
Okay, Joe, I want to challenge you there because in IPv4, there's not really any need to have RFC 1918 addresses. People want non-unique addresses. People like non-unique addresses. You go talk to the average enterprise, and they're putting non-unique addresses on there for a reason.
I think people are getting confused between anonymity and security. Yes, non-unique addresses, hiding behind a NAT gives some level of anonymity, but it doesn't give you the security. It's really the firewall function of that box, that's often a common box, that gives you what you're really looking forward is security. And then what we are hearing is we've got these enterprises who have their VPNs, but they want to be able to have their voice over IP work outside their VPN or across their VPN or across communities of interest or across extranets. And yeah, we're finding ways to do that for voice over IP, but when we're trying to get to collaborative web or video over IP, each one of these converged IP environments are going to create new problems when the end devices have common addresses.
Yeah, and I would like to chime in on that, and I think that this is really a challenge that we're all going to face with any sort of new technology development, is that there's a number of people who are trying to challenge the end-to-end business market in that we want to firewall everything off. We want to lock services down. We want to make sure that you can only we're going to go and encapsulate everything over HTTP port 80 type of stuff. And certainly that's been the trend, and you see the firewalls and everyone blocking, stuff. And why can you go and put in to your AIM client to say, connect to their AIM servers on port 22 or port 80? It's because people are finding ways to work around these solutions, work around policies and firewalls. And people are attempting to use firewalls and these other devices to offer themselves some semblance of security, but they're still getting infected behind these systems anyways. And people are essentially misusing and abusing the technology.
So you don't think they should be allowed to have it?
I think that some people certainly should not be using technology in the way they are. If they have the money to buy it and abuse it, that's theirs to do. But
so essentially, your position is that your enterprise customers shouldn't be allowed to use network address translation?
So, some of them misuse it. They would like to do stuff like be able to have their VoIP users roam, and when they're in hotels, be able to log into their corporate network or something else. And they put these firewall boxes in the way, and you end up punching holes in them and doing all sorts of complicated things. And if we see some global IPv6 system, what's going to stop somebody from setting up and say, oh, well, to be compliant with this stuff, you're going to need to put in your v6 NAT box in front of your corporate network, as opposed to just an actual v6 firewall. And you see people go and take and say, a NAT is a type of firewall, right? And go and implement that as a solution when it's, a solution but not the right solution.
But just to push back here, most of the folks who are doing NAT aren't doing it because they can't get the IP addresses.
I would actually beg to differ in that a lot of people do NAT at home, for example,
right,
for economic reasons.
Sure, folks do NAT at home, but let's talk about it in the business world. The typical enterprise networks, your big customers for the most part. These guys have as many addresses as they want to. They can go to Aaron, they can go to their upstreams, whatever. They don't have to do NAT, but they do NAT anyway. Do you think that's a misuse?
I think that is not necessarily a misuse, but they put themselves in a position where they limit themselves in the future.
Okay. And also, Aaron frowns upon giving out addresses to somebody who doesn't bother advertising them out to the internet. So the idea of using real routable addresses and not end up seeing them somewhere on the internet kind of goes again with Aaron's direction.
Well, actually, that's not any part of any Aaron regulation. Aaron actually makes no statements about routability at all. They make statements about host count and stuff like that, but they don't demand that any addresses you get be routable.
Yeah, we're really being killed right now with the private address space. More and more companies are operating from the standpoint of joint ventures or some type of collaboration to accomplish their missions. And we run into this. We have hundreds of sites around the planet. When we form a business relationship for a specific product and we want to do an intercorporate connection over a VPN, what do? Our 10.star may conflict with something that's 10.star somewhere else, so we end up with NAT over NAT. You asked a question about RFPs. I'm involved in several RFPs for federal customers. Recent one that we did in December was IMOD, that's the infrastructure modernization, and this is upgrading the inside and outside plant services for all the Army bases. Section 3.3 of the RFP had specific warranty sections on that thing associated with the V6 implementation. It is a requirement. This is not a small contract, it's $4 billion, so we see this over and over again with our military guys. And where things are going, look at quad play, what's going on with IMS, the IP multimedia subsystem, 3GPP and 3GPP2 specs on this thing. The requirement for V6 to really implement this 100%. And last comment on the firewalls, more and more companies doing intercorporate or collaborative work are exposing more and more stuff to the outside. So you have DMZs that are growing and growing and growing. Internal corporate information is being exposed more and more to the outside. So getting over the hurdles, we need to make sure that we address, like Joe said, security not from the IP address space, but the appropriate security mechanisms. Over.
Okay. So now, other than NAT, okay, so you guys don't like NAT, and we get that. Other than that, what does IPv6 get us other than longer address space? Because there have been a lot of claims made in this area. Enhanced security, enhanced quality, it does your dishes for you, it turns the world into a better place. Any thoughts there?
I believe you're right. The only thing it gives us is more bits.
Okay.
Jason Schiller, Verizon Business, UUNet. The other thing that it also gives us is an IP stack that's young, that people seem to think it's easy to get modifications into.
Is that good?
Well, it allows for new features, presumably, like mobility, referring,
Okay.
which you could theoretically do in v4. It just doesn't seem like people want to go through the trouble of changing the stack.
But I'm saying IPv6 sort of as written. You know, of course, it's a work in progress, but as written. Do you guys see anything else other than longer address space?
Yeah, something I'm looking forward to is standardization on how to use that flow label field. I mean, it's written, it's spaced there. It's got so much potential for, again, bringing value back into the IP network, being able to use something beyond the diff serve kind of model for being able to have applications-aware networking. I think the flow label has a lot of opportunity there.
Well, right now it's just a bunch of bits. Right?
Yeah, right now it's just so I'm looking forward to it. It's built into the header, so I think that's great. The definition of how to use it, I think, is still up for quite a bit of discussion. I'm looking forward to when that gets stabilized.
Okay.
Your question cracks me up. This is like saying 12 years ago, what's the value of the internet? Relatively immature, and I think there's a lot of things that will come out as people are allowed to experiment and innovate. And this, look at where IMS is going. Look at true mobility. What's going on in the area of telematics right now, advanced telematics research. There's things that we have not imagined yet that are going to be enabled through some of the features of V6 beyond the address space.
Such as what?
Part of it is the security context itself. V4 with all the bolt-on.
Yeah, well, V4 is as it is now. I mean, we can't really compare V4 as it was when IPNG started in 1993 versus V6 right now. We have to, right now it's 2006. We have to compare IPv4 with all of its add-ons, its IPsec, SSL VPNs, et cetera, and right now DiffServ versus V6 right now, because that's the business decision we're sort of making, right? So given that, right now, what do we get out of V6?
Some level of simplification, and that's important to a bunch of customers. Can I really get rid of some of the garbage I have beyond that and the other things and make my life actually simpler? Can I enable things that I have not been able to do in the past? Take a look at it from the standpoint of major carriers, OpEx and CapEx. October last year, Toshiba came out with a Z1000 series IPTV, 3 Ethernet jacks in your TV. Big deal, everyone says, but take a look at and this is being implemented in Japan thanks to our buddies down the road at NTT is providing service. Now the carriers can say, I don't have to have the redundant services in place. We see major convergence in the carriers right now, driving out the redundancy between the voice and data services. Other services are going to be going the same way. And doing this all with all the devices in the planet running V4, I don't think it's going to fly long term.
Okay. One big issue we have right now revolves around enterprise multi-homing. Essentially, provider independent address space, the ability to multi-home if you're not actually an ISP or an LIR in Aaron speak or RIPE speak. That's a big deal right now, and there's a lot of discussions on this on the Aaron Public Policy mailing list. At the last NANOG, there's a lot of sparks, a lot of fireworks over one of the proposed solutions, which is SHIM-6, which I think the general agreement was that we didn't like as a group. Now, right now, I think we might be able to agree, and maybe you guys will disagree with me, that enterprise multi-homing is sort of a customer requirement, that people are not willing to give this up. Provider independent address space or a work-alike to it is something people aren't willing to give up, and the SHIM-6 won't work. Given that, where do we go? How do we implement V6 in anything other than a government sort of paradigm where government can get the V6 space they want, Google and Yahoo can get the V6 space they want, but, you know, number 78 on the Fortune 500 list maybe can't get the provider independent V6 space we want. What does that mean for us?
I'll go back to the version think kind of discussion that we have here is that private addresses or provider independent addresses was IPv4's way of being able to do dual homing. IPv6, again, SHIM-6 is the only thing that's in the works right now, and it may not be the best implementation of dual homing, but the idea is you get multiple addresses. You get address from each of your providers. You get the 5 providers. You get 5 blocks of addresses. You can choose to do as you want, and the edge devices will end up being smart enough to be able to know how to use those addresses. This provider independent stuff.
We all know how SHIM-6 works. The question is, I think, you know, at the last NANOG, it was pretty clear that most folks think it's very bad. It's a very bad thing for the internet, and it's something that requires every host operating system in the world to be rewritten, and it's something that will, in all likelihood, never happen. Given those things, and enterprises aren't too crazy about it either, certainly hosting folks like Yahoo, they don't like it at all because, you know, they have to have a tremendous amount of state sitting on their servers. Given that, you know, the network operations community has rejected SHIM-6 so overwhelmingly, where do we go from there for enterprise multi-home?
Well, I'm surprised we as an operator group is not more concerned about fragmentation of the addresses in an IPv6 world. I mean, I think with the growth of AS numbers and with the growth of IP addresses, it's really scary that we'll end up having to foot the bill for this fragmentation where somebody else gets a lot of the benefits, and we should be careful about supporting a proposal that has us footing the bill and bearing the cost.
Well, I would like to see us not have to continue to upgrade our routers and router memory and such, but I'm not sure I see a path other than that right now, and it doesn't seem to be any different in the IPv6 space.
It's the potential for an explosion, and yes, we've had some growth. It's been managed growth, higher than linear growth, but there's the potential for an explosion, which scares me quite a bit.
Well, what's the driver for an explosion?
Is that it could happen. I mean, what are we advertising out?
Well, that's the potential. But
right.
Yeah, somebody could deaggregate the entire internet today and take down a lot of the routers because they would malloc.
Well, what did we agree to? A /24, right? We won't listen to anything longer than /24. What could that end up being in IPv6, and how many of those could there be out there?
I expect that would be a /48.
Okay, so what's the order of magnitude more /48s that will be out there than /24s?
But here's the thing:
right
if we deaggregated the internet to /24s, it goes boom right now.
So it's what percentage of the potential? So we've got to have some measure of fragmentation right now in the V4 world, and if we had that same kind of fragmentation in the V6 world, what would that end up doing to our routing tables? We don't have a good sense of that, I don't think.
It would be just as bad, and we would come to some sort of a consensus as an operator community about what to do about that. And historically, that was, I believe, initially led by Sprint, who originally had some filters that would not accept prefixes longer than a certain lengthened v4 space, and speaking with as AS2914, we were one of the people who helped hold that for a significant amount of time to encourage people to do the right thing and not deaggregate.
Okay.
We're going to see shortly on Aaron on the PPML, we're going to see a statement of position from the IPv6 Business Council. And we've had several meetings, including Citigroup, Boeing, Walmart, SIAC, Warner Music, and several other large global companies that are trying to address this thing. And Bechtel has, I don't know, 25, 30, 40 different ISPs around the world. And our network changes on a regular basis. Having to acquire, let go IP address space based on who the provider is as we go around the planet is not something that we're really interested in. And whether we get our /48 or 48s directly from Aaron or whoever our RIR is, or through one of our carriers, shouldn't make that much difference. When we contract, when Bechtel contracts with the carrier to provide service, we're looking for bandwidth. It might be some CPE, equipment management, or stuff like that, not namespace. So we'd like to work with our providers to, as part of the overall contract, to see if they'll advertise for us our global namespace. From the standpoint of enterprise address management, having common namespace across the enterprise in 100+ countries sure makes it easier for the enterprise.
So let me ask you a more specific question. Does Bechtel have IPv6 space of its own?
Yes, we do.
And how did you get it?
We went through Aaron and got our IPv6 space. And one thing that we do when we construct a facility is it's a turnkey facility such as a power plant or an airport or something like this. When the facility is complete, we'll turn it over to the owner, including all the network stuff. So we're operating from the standpoint on our projects as a LIR.
Okay.
So we got a LIR size application.
So do all enterprises just need to declare themselves LIRs now and get some
No.
v6 space?
No, I don't think they do. Not everyone fits into that mode.
Okay.
But I do think we need to face the fact that enterprises that are dealing with dozens of service providers around the planet have an internal need to have some way to manage the network as a whole, and a whole from the standpoint of the address namespace.
Okay. Guys?
Yeah, I wanted to respond to something that was said a little bit earlier about the number of 24s that exist in the routing table and how many times more 48s could we have than 24s that are possible. If you look at v4 unicast routable space, there's just over 16 million /24s. If you think 48 is the number that we would need to deaggregate to, there's over 137 billion addresses. So, I mean, we're looking at 2 million times, potentially more, 48s than we have 24s. And let me point out that if you're assigning a /48 to your end user and they want to have some traffic engineering capabilities, then you probably have to deaggregate to something more specific or shorter than that.
Okay. So what is your opinion, and what is Verizon Business's opinion on the ability of enterprises to multi-home under v6?
There's a couple ways to answer this question. The first is the Tony Haynes response, which is multi-homing in v6 just works, deaggregate. The routers will keep up. I'm not convinced that that's the case. I'm concerned about routing table size. The other way to answer this question is to say, well, let's figure out a way to do this without deaggregating. Let's look at shim6. Let's solve the provider-independent problem without deaggregation. And unfortunately, I don't think IETF is moving in a direction that gives the right capabilities to transit ASs or to business customers that want to do their traffic engineering at the network level. So we need another solution is really my answer.
Wes, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think the biggest issue right now is that it is broken. You know, the memory is reasonably cheap comparatively. The problem we have right now is that
TCAM memory?
no, just memory in general.
Okay.
The problem you have right now is that you have some other sorts of memory like TCAM and then you have things like ASIC design and some of the design assumptions that vendors are using. It's kind of the equivalent of putting together a layout that is based on no aggregation, like a classful network in IPv4, and then having it start deaggregating, and if your assumptions are all wrong, your fast path stops working, and you end up having much larger problems than just the simple, I need 10 gigs of memory in every router in order to handle the routing table.
Okay, but what is your opinion, and what is Sprint's opinion on V6 multi-homing for enterprises?
Well, right now we're adhering pretty carefully to the RFC that Rob wrote a while ago on what's the number? About strictly announcing the top aggregation and nothing more.
Mm-hmm.
And at this point,
Which eliminates even PA multi-homing.
right. And the problem is that this is sort of a way to prove that it's broken. I mean, there isn't a good solution right now.
So do you think most providers will adhere to the idea of not even PA multi-homing for V6? I mean, do you think most providers will just
Okay.
advertise?
Could we clarify? You don't mean multi-homing, you mean multi-advertising.
Well, I think we all know as a group what, multi-homing means.
Well, okay, let's be clear. There's a lot of potential implementations for multi-homing. The situation we're talking about here is multi-advertising.
Sure.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay, well, given that, do you think it's likely that most service providers will only advertise, fully, essentially no summary aggregates of V6 space? Or do you think they will leak more specific routes for their customers in V6? Well, what are y'all's policies on this? I'm just curious.
So I have to separate two things. There's what I believe should be done, and then there's what I have seen us do so far in this V6 space. And I believe that people should, and wearing my personal hat, I encourage people to do what a lot of other people do, which is filter on the RIR boundaries. If somebody is allocated and Aaron says they only allocate 48s out of a block, I think that it's wise for people to go and do that and filter and say, I will only accept prefix lengths up to 48.
So not necessarily the RAR boundary for that specific block, but the minimum RAR allocation limit.
Yes.
Okay, so in other words, a provider could get a /32 and be giving out chunks of that, and you'd accept a leak /48 in your personal opinion.
Yeah, and I think based on that, I think that's pretty reasonable. A lot of people have done that in the V4 space, and what can be done to go and mirror that policy as best as possible, I think is wise and sound technically to be done. What I have seen happen is I have seen customers come to us and pressure us and say, I want to be able to advertise my 64 or something else, and
That's a no?
And we spent a lot of time churning on this internally. And I think that we eventually gave in to the customer, but that doesn't mean that everyone else should accept the route from us.
Got it. Okay, what about the rest of you guys? What about Verizon Business? What's your point of view on allowing these sort of advertisements? Because this is going to come up, I think, much sooner than later.
Well, right now, we're really taking our cue from what's recommended in IETF and ARIN, and that seems to be that aggregation is the holy grail. So we're only advertising our aggregate. We allow customers to advertise to us whatever they want inside their space, more specifics. But to the global internet routing table, we're only advertising the aggregates. That's our policy at the moment. If provider independent space goes through and people start listening to, or people start putting /48s into the global internet routing table, then that's probably an indication that aggregation is not the holy grail, and it probably sets a precedent for doing the same for provider assigned addresses.
Joe?
Yeah, I agree with the first part of what Jason said, but I'm really worried about the slippery slope here. And but you kind of do what the marketplace requires you to do. So I'm kind of on the edge of the roof right there.
Okay, Fred?
Yeah, just to be clear, I'm worried about the slippery slope also.
Yeah.
Okay.
Now, if there's a brick wall, there will not be a slippery slope. We just won't get anywhere. I'd like my colleagues up here just to address what the business issues, what your customers are looking for. 20, 30, 40 ISPs that I'm dealing with around the planet. They're not all in Aaron. I've got tons of intercorporate connections with other people. I have a real requirement for a high level of mobility and agility, and I cannot be locked in to IP address space provided by a single provider or by all these guys at once. It's not manageable from a corporate standpoint. So how do you guys fix my problem?
And just to back Fred up, I mean, I hear that from, I have 400, really big enterprise customers, like Global 2000, and they all say that. No one is with this idea of no provider independence space. Most of them say that is my deal breaker for V6. Sure.
Honestly, I think this is probably one of those things that is going to drive more adoption within the VPN area of the universe, the private network stuff that doesn't connect to the big I internet for purposes of, whatever test networks need to be, whatever the government believes is going to see its benefit from IPv6. There's less of a driver to go there in the regular IPv4 world, other than some general FUD around, well, if all these other countries are building their IP networks from scratch right now, why wouldn't they go straight to IPv6, and we don't want to get left behind, kind of thing.
And that's what they're saying too.
Right.
So, any other thoughts here on the enterprise angle?
I kind of it doesn't sound quite right, but is it NANOG's problem? I think it's a plumbing problem, and we're a bunch of carpenters. We don't have the right tools to fix the plumbing. It's a plumbing problem.
So you're saying this is the IETS problem?
I'm kind of alluding to that, yeah.
Well, yeah, I think clearly it's the IETS problem. I think the issue is the IETF has given us a saw when we need a hammer or something like that. I mean, it's the right tool for the right job, and if they don't give you the right tool, you've got to push back.
So Dan, are you saying more operators should go to the IETF and get involved and get the right tools?
Yeah, I think in my perfect neverland where IPv6 gives us bunnies and stuff, I think a lot of that would happen. I think in the real world, I think a lot of operators have trouble seeing the ROI in sending a lot of people to the IETF, whereas vendors have a very clear ROI in going to the IETF. I think it would be great, and I think the better thing would be for the IETF to be aggressively coming to forums like this, like they did at the last NANOG, but much earlier in the process for requirements gathering. It's not important that operators go and actually make the solutions, but operators need to be making the requirements, and I don't think that's what's happening now.
So getting a useful IPv6 protocol that supports multi-homing is not a good return on an investment for sending 2 people to IETF?
I would like to think that it is personally, but I think and I know that that's not going to change what operators are doing today. For all but the very largest operators. I mean, our margins are small. But on that note, let me open this up to questions. Anyone? Anyone have any nice softballs they want to throw at the panelists?
Oh, good.
All right, here we are. Line up, boys and ladies. Let's have, please say your name and affiliation, if any, and also which victim you're carrying to target, if any. If not all, Star is an acceptable victim.
Joel Yegley, University of Oregon. All of you, I guess. I look in my routing table and I don't see 16.7 million routes. So I expect, even if people deaggregate in V6, that I'm not going to see 137 billion/48s that I have to carry. And I guess I would turn that around and say, in the context of something like Shim6, that means I get to carry a lot more state in my hosts. And as a, part of my network operation is the thousands of PCs that we use to serve all that data to our end users. So,
we've got to share the pain. You know?
Well, if we get to, I mean,
and this is yours.
if I have to carry that in memory, I might actually prefer to carry it like in a smaller number of machines than a larger number of machines.
So, quick question for you. You're here from a university, so I assume that you're involved with I2 and things of that nature. So, talk a little bit about your I2 experience with V6.
Well, we get our V6 address block from them, so unfortunately we don't have anything to multi-home with. So that is an interesting IPv6 experience right there.
So multi-homing important for the university?
It certainly is in the V4 space. I mean, if you think about it, we have 3 upstreams. So, yes.
Are you guys prepared to replace all your host operating systems or upgrade them to do Shim6?
At present, there's no Shim6 stack for us to upgrade to, so it's sort of an academic question.
On guard, yes.
Joel, to answer the first part of your question, in terms of concerns about the size of the routing table, I just wanted to crunch a couple quick numbers. We're looking at it over 170K internet routes. You add to that another 50 to 150K internal V4 routes. You're easily in the neighborhood of 300K routes for your V4 table. You add to that what the V6 table could be. If you make an assumption that every autonomous system is going to advertise one aggregate, and they're going to advertise the aggregates based on what we see in the current V4 table, assuming everyone's doing dual stack, you're looking at 21K ASs, so that's another 21K V6 aggregates, about 60K intentional D-aggregates in the V4 space. So if you map that over to V6, that's another 59K.
Although,
is
that necessarily a correlation? Because there are some additional routes in the V4 table because people can't get large enough single blocks, right?
Okay, so what I'm looking at basically is the CIDR report. If we've got about 176K prefixes in the internet, that can be aggregated down to 117K. That would indicate that there's 59K intentional D-aggregates happening.
Okay.
So you take that 59K, you add that to one aggregate per AS, which is like 21K, and that's 80K internet V6 prefixes. Add that to your 170K V4 internet prefixes. Add that to your 50K to 150K internal V4 prefixes. And add that to your...
Does that count your MPLS prefixes?
No.
Okay.
I mean...
Right, add all of your...
I mean, you're well over 500K just today, never mind growth.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I think one thing... Yes, I have a lot of other stuff I have to compile into my fib as well, right? I mean, you know, the 2547 VPN stuff doesn't help either. So, I mean, there's a lot of pieces that are actually putting pressure on my fib. I don't think V6 is actually the one that's hurting me the most at the moment. But obviously, you know, we can point to how much it's going to hurt immediately if all of those ASs started announcing V6 routes.
Yeah, I think the only response I want to say to that is when vendors come to me and say, the box we're shipping today can handle the entire V6 routing table, I say, you know, that's great, but is this the path I want to commit to for the next 2 years, 5 years, 10 years, 15 years?
Today, Jason, it fits in 256 KFT cam.
Yeah. Okay, hold on a sec. Woody.
Bill Woodcock, PCH. Something I want to call the audience's attention to. Dan asked Mr. Wetling.
Okay, louder, please.
Dan asked the gentleman from Bechtel whether Bechtel had its own IPv6 space, and got the answer yes. And there are a few other large enterprises in the Aran region that have their own IPv6 space. What I want to point out to the audience of network operators is that the only way to get IPv6 space in the Aran region is to assert that you are an ISP and assert that you are going to have a large number of IPv6 customers imminently. And if you think that this should not be the only way to get IPv6 space, and you'd like the Aran policies to reflect reality and not force people to make perhaps unfortunate mischaracterizations of their organizations and plans.
But isn't that a tradition when dealing with Aran?
then you might want to participate in the ARIN policy process and help us get an end user or an end site v6 policy in place so that things will match up.
Boy, that could actually eliminate like the traditional annual, offering up of the lies to ARIN or something,
Yeah.
Uh-oh.
Uh-oh.
Hi, John. Ted?
Yeah, actually, Jason.
Quick response, please. Yeah, we struggled with, when we got our ARIN allocation, we struggled with the number of RIRs we would have to deal with. We struggled with our business model where we actually leave network space behind to our customer. And we figured the only way that we could actually get our job done on a sustainable basis was to get our own allocation. So I'm a proponent of making sure that the ARIN and other RIR policies reflect what really needs to be done. But in our case, it was done just because we have to act as an ISP.
Well, yeah, I think it's reasonable to act in your corporation's own best interest. I mean, that's what we're obligated to do. Ted Seeley.
Ted Seeley from Sprint. Jason, beautiful segue, but I'm going to aim this one at Jared.
No comment.
You kind of hit something on, Jason, that I think is important. And Dan, I wish you would have asked this question, and it's about scale and the infrastructure. And today, as I said a minute ago, the entire v6 routing table will fit in 256 KFT cam. Well, v6 isn't going to replace v4 overnight. You'll have v4, v6, v6 VRS, v4 VRS, v4 and v6 VRS, all of the above living very happy in your router. Jared, you have the most experience with this. Have you done any homework to extrapolate out how often you will have to replace your line cards and upgrade your memory exponentially, and how often is that?
We have not done that because we have not seen any need, because the traffic levels are not even anywhere near significant when compared to the V4 traffic levels. We're spending more time upgrading the cards to handle the V4 stuff, and along the way we pick up the additional V6 functionality on some of the platforms that we have that do not do all of the forwarding and hardware. So as we're upgrading our V4 capacity, we're picking up the V6 stuff along the way.
See, you get that for free today, so one last question. Would you agree with the fact that if and when v6 takes off, it will deaggregate? There's no stopping it. So how do you keep up with that growth? How do you pay for it?
Well, I think that I would actually somewhat defer to Jason's numbers on that I don't think that the deaggregation in the v6 space is going to be nearly as bad as it is in the v4 space. But that being said as well, I think that we'll continue to see technology improve along the way. And we're still a ways away from stuff, and we may see a new mini internet boom in the v6 space where everyone has to fork over those big checks to the vendors again.
Your freezer wants an IP address, so to say.
Think RFIDs.
Hey, Ted, the other question is, will your vendors be able to build the router big enough,
That's
and
a
will
damn
it be
good
able
question.
to live in the network long enough for you to
the
get
thing
your
is,
return back?
this hasn't been a discussion of, when people are talking about 2547 VPNs, where you have an almost unlimited number of prefixes due to the use of 1918 space and route distinguishers with 2547, and folks are now experiencing, now that there's a big frame relay to 2547 transition, enterprises that want to send you 3,000 routes. This is not that uncommon. So why is this more of a big deal with the potentially unlimited number of prefixes in v6 versus the potentially unlimited number of prefixes in 2547 VRFs?
I don't think that it's a difference specifically that we're making a distinction specifically for v6. This is more a problem of all the things being added together. You have the growth of the VPN routes, you have the growth of the internet v4 routing table, and if this v6 thing actually does take off and somebody starts using it for something real, you're going to have the same growth over there. And the problem is that most of the things that we've been getting from the vendors is that we essentially have to choose, or we have to continue to throw forklift upgrades at the network every 2 years, because you end up in a situation where you can have, if you're doing just one sort of routing, if you're doing just IPv4 and some 2547 routes, you have XK of routes you can handle.
If you throw V6 into that, it cuts both of those numbers in half, and oh, by the way, you can only have 20K IPv6 routes. And if any of those numbers scale around, it's a continual moving target. It's almost impossible to capacity plan to, and you end up in a situation where you're continually replacing hardware just to keep up with it.
We try to get a couple more. Steve?
Hi, Steve Feldman, representing my employer, CNET Networks. We're a medium-sized content company. Our business is providing content over the internet. If the internet goes away for us, we don't have any revenue. People don't click on our ads, no money, no job, no nothing. My management has told me that the way that we mitigate against that risk is by having more than one provider and multi-homing. So in V4 space, we have a provider-independent block that we can advertise. We're happy. V6 space, we need to be able to do something similar. We need to multi-home. Doesn't matter so much how, but we have to be able to do it. PI space would be great. We know how that works. We'd love to be able to do that, announce it, whatever. PA space would be suboptimal but acceptable. If we could get a block from provider A and announce it through provider B, we'd be happy. If provider A won't announce won't announce what I'm sending him, or provider B won't announce it, it's useless. No point. I'm not going to buy V6 transit from him. Basically what it comes down to is if there's not a usable multi-homing solution in V6 for our company, we're not going to use it because it's useless to us. I understand all about the problems with routing space and everything, but from my management's point of view, that's not the problem that we have to solve. It's the problem that our providers have to solve.
So Steve, do all your existing providers support V6?
Currently, only one of them does, and that provider, we're still waiting actually for our V6 connection, which we're going to be using for test traffic only, and that provider won't allow us to multi-home anyways, so we'd never use it in production.
John?
Hi, John Curran, Chairman, Aaron. I was part of the IPNG Directorate in '93 and '94 when this V6 stuff was getting started and we were trying to figure out what to do. It's a lot different than it was back then. They went through a few evolutions through the IETF. There was an implication earlier that Aaron processes applications, and sometimes those applications aren't 100% reflecting reality. And so,
just a joke, really.
So I got to say something. First, Aaron's paying a lot of attention to this. It was in the board meeting for the last 6 months. The staff has taken measures to do everything we can to verify applications, both V4 and V6. I want to point out to people and take this opportunity that as we go through the next 10 or 15 years, and the demand for V4 addresses sort of continues unabated, and the total quantity also is a fixed number, that the diligence that's going to need to go on V4 applications is going to ramp up. And actually, over in Aaron, we're going to have discussions of that over the next few meetings about how much work should it be to get that next IPv4 address. And I actually would encourage people to begin that thought process here. What do you think we should do to your peers when they go and ask for an IPv4 address block? And then what would you yourself put up with when you go to ask for that same block, particularly as we get just a decade or so down the road? Thank you.
IP police router inspection. Step away from the console. I don't. Any thoughts? Do we need to tighten things up? Okay, Randy.
Randy Bush, IIJ. Considering that the number of current IPv6 allocations has many orders of magnitudes more host than the total number of bytes or bits that move on the internet using IPv6. Perchance we're talking about the wrong part of the problem.
Well said. RS?
Rob Seastrom speaking for myself, not for my employer, because I'm speaking about myself, not my employer. I run IPv6 in my AS, and the router is subject to being cannibalized for parts when the other router dies. And it's going to stay that way until there's something useful on V6, and it's going to stay that way until we can multi-home with V6. And Shim6 is only the latest in a litany of things that we have been offered as ways to do this. And once upon a time, there was something called rough consensus and working code, and it seems to have been replaced by analysis paralysis.
Thoughts? Okay. Last comment.
Tony Hain, just follow up real quickly on that and then get back to the original point. Part of the reason that there's analysis paralysis is because the original round of analysis had a list of self-conflicting requirements. And in fact, if you think about the problem space here, the network operators have a set of requirements and the insights have a set of requirements, and several of those are explicitly conflicting. And then when you overlay, don't blow up the routing table on top of all that, it really gets bad. So, yes, that's what's caused it.
Engineering is the art of making compromises.
Understand. And so that's the rough consensus part that you agree on, that we need again. And we've lost that partially because this community has stopped participating in the IETF effectively. And so the IETF kind of spirals out of control without a feedback mechanism except for people that come here periodically and carry the message back, and there's not enough voices. Right? So I encourage you to think about that problem, right? If you want the IETF to do something, you have to go there and make sure that they're doing it. Operators have always had influence. The other thing that I came up here is the point about fear kept coming up from the panel, about fear of what could happen if we allowed PI space. And to that end, I've actually had a draft floating around for a number of years now that talks about a different way of looking at the problem. And how do we think about this thing long term, allow the sites that are going to be explicit entries in the routing system anyway to be there, and take all the guys you really care about aggregating out and have a mechanism to gracefully aggregate them out. Right? Because the big guys, I think everybody will agree, will have a routing slot. Some way, shape, or form, they will get a routing slot. Right? It's how do you distinguish the big guy from the little guy in a reasonable way and make a consistent determination of that. And hard prefix boundaries has been done in the past. That's not necessarily a good choice. You know, we need to rethink that problem and think about, is this mythical global routing table really, truly a single global routing table? Route views would argue that it isn't.
Tony, just one quick question for you. Is there an active effort going on in the IETF today to rethink internet routing in the big picture?
No, the conversation keeps happening that it needs to happen.
Okay.
But nothing.
How many folks here think it's time for the IETF to start thinking about global routing again?
Okay, and how many of you are actually going to show up at the next IETF meeting, which is here in Dallas, and try to make that point and drive it?
Okay.
It's a, well, but at the same time, that's really what it comes down to is if you're not willing to step up to the IETF and say we need a new routing system, then you're not going to get one. You get a few voices and not enough to carry the day, and that's the point. And that's the ROI discussion.
Ted, can you denounce him into the microphone?
I said the vendors monopolize the IETF, and they don't want to hear what the service providers have to say anymore because it doesn't sell boxes.
I would actually argue against that because they're selling the boxes to the vendors and to the service providers, and if it doesn't meet the service provider's need, it doesn't solve the problem. But I hear your point. Taking off my Cisco hat taking off my Cisco hat, I will agree with you, but that's not because they don't want to listen to you as a customer, right? It's because we have 5 different people listening to different customers and trying to sell you something you don't want.
If there's 5 different people selling the same product, that might represent a problem.
Putting my Cisco hat back on, yes, we need to fix that.
Joel Yegley again. The time scale on which you can re-architect the global internet routing architecture for V6 or V4 is probably not relevant to this discussion. I mean, you can go to the IETF, but if we're still discussing this in 10 years, we're probably screwed.
Entirely possible. And our last comment from Randy.
As my friend Vince over here just mumbled, we've been saying that for 10 years. There are a significant number of people in this room who have spent blood over 15 years at the IETF trying to get the routing paradigm fixed for this. The idea of telling us to go back into that cesspool to get anything done. The food isn't even any good.
And on the note of food, it is now 12:17. We're a little bit over time. I want to thank everyone on the panel. I'd like to thank Joe. I'd like to thank Fred. I'd like to thank Jared. I'd like to thank Jason. I'd like to thank Wes. Thank you all very much.